The books we wanted to focus on today really emphasize the builder aspect of the Christian vision. So we were made in God's image. God is our creator. His image and likeness includes creation. We ought to create in some way, shape, or form, regardless of whether you're a stay-at-home mom or a software developer. You should create, you should build. We're builders as Christians. We don't just remain faithful to a task with our hands in our pockets. We ought to live quiet lives, according to Paul, and to work with our hands for the service of others. And we should build. And books can help us to guide us in ways we should build. Hello and welcome to What Would Jesus Tech? My name is Andrew Noble. I am with Joel Jacob, and Austin is not with us today. We are together a adjunct professor. I'm also a PhD student, Joel, update on the job title. PhD candidate. I've progressed in my degree. And you're still principal product manager, correct?
I am at Splunk, which is acquired by Cisco. So the role has definitely broadened to be, more about what does Cisco do, not just what does Splunk do.
And it's summertime. I like to read books whenever I can, but the summer is often a time when people set aside a number of books that they hope to get through. And by the end of this episode, there will hopefully be 7 books that we will get to recommend to our listeners. 7 because there's one that we're not going to talk about in any detail, but just because it is the 250th anniversary of 1776. The foundation of America, yes, but also one of the most important years in history. Andrew Wilson, he's a pastor, but he's also kind of has this side gig as a historian. And he wrote an excellent book called Remaking the World. The chapter in it on machines is excellent if you're looking for historical context for how people made things and how important the first industrial revolution was to remaking the world. So that's one book that I would recommend to people as just an enjoyable book to go through. But the books we wanted to focus on today really emphasize the builder aspect of the Christian vision. So we were made in God's image. God is our creator. His image and likeness includes creation. We ought to create in some way, shape, or form, regardless of whether you're a stay-at-home mom or a software developer. You should create, you should build. We're builders as Christians. We don't just remain faithful to a task with our hands in our pockets. We ought to live quiet lives, according to Paul, and to work with our hands for the service of others. And we should build. And books can help us to guide us in ways we should build. So each of us have 3 to talk through. And hopefully when the AI summarizes these chapters, it will easily give you as the listener an ability to skip ahead if you've already known about the book or whatever. But Joel, what's your first book that you want to talk about that was impactful to you as a Christian builder?
Yeah. And well, maybe before jumping in the first book, I'll give a story about how I actually started getting into reading technology or builder books in general. I actually started my career as an engineer. I enjoyed reading as a kid, but during university, didn't read much, not even the textbooks we were supposed to read. And then when I graduated, I still didn't read, but at some point, the opportunity came to switch from engineering into product management. And I didn't have a background in product management. And there was a lot of quote unquote product books, which I know you'll mention one, but I said to myself, okay, in this year, I really got to accelerate. Just going to try a book a week challenge. So that would be 52 books in a year. Maybe some books are thick. They're going to take longer than a week. And some books you can actually get done in 3 days. So it might balance out. But to get to 52 books, which for me as a person who hadn't read in a while was like, oh, how am I really going to do this? And caveat, definitely use Audible and a bunch of other things on my commute to help me get there. And then some time on vacation to also maybe get through a couple more books than I usually would have. So one of the books that I did read was a book called Range. And actually, do you remember the author? I don't have the author handy, but that book,
David Epstein. Wait, Epstein? What? No, not that Epstein.
Um,
The subtitle is Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. New York Times #1 bestseller, David Epstein.
yeah, so when I read this, and this was actually before, the AI era, I don't know, maybe 5 years or so ago, um, there was some bias because I consider myself a generalist, right? So I'm just gonna caveat that and being like, oh, this book is like speaking to me and people like me who consider themselves generalist. And I would say that like when I went to school, even I couldn't decide on a major, like, oh, mechanical engineering, electrical engineering. No, I'll do mechatronics because you just do a little bit of all three of them, including software. So you end up just becoming a generalist. But what that ends up doing is that when you go into the work world, I don't know as much as a mechanical engineer on um, physical products or designing circuits as an electrical engineer, but I know enough to have a conversation with them, summarize that, and then explain that to an executive. So that ended up being a skill set that I was able to do, and then I viewed that as what generalists do in general. So it's like, okay, that just so happened to be my career path. But in this book, it talks about why actually having breadth of experience is really valuable. And I won't spoil, the analogies in the books, but it talks about how, let's say, for athletes, even, you could really focus on one particular sport, or you could be an athlete that is like generally good in different sports. And then eventually, when you find the one that you excel the most at, those other skills you developed along the way actually come to push you to being at the very top.
Mhm.
So there's, several different analogies. Probably
There's a
the
lot of
biggest takeaway.
soccer players that they're like soccer players and basketball players, but the footwork you learn in soccer really helps you when you're balancing and doing that kind of footwork necessary for basketball. But you
Mhm.
don't think about footwork when you think about basketball, but it's integral to the game at an elite level, but not at the initial levels. So that's like an illustration of your point. Maybe it's a
Yeah,
chapter in the book. I don't know. David
you're,
Robinson, I
you're,
think, is
you're,
often one of those guys. Wemby as well.
I mean, you're one of those guys. You're an elite baller in a past life, right?
Elite is a strong word to use someone who kept the bench warm, but I'll take it. I'll take it, Joel. Thanks. Um,
Um, Yeah, I mean that'll be a story, I guess, for the Patreon on Andrew's basketball career. Uh,
it was a very interesting career. I will grant you it. There is a story there. So shout out to our Patreon listeners, who I guess, according to Joel, I'm going to tell that story to.
so to continue with the book range, um, the main kind of statement maybe you could take away is that there are kind worlds and wicked worlds, and a kind world is something where it's a it's a bounded environment. So let's take chess, right? There are rules and how to play the game, and it's very predefined, and you play by the rules. And that's what you call a kind condition. And now with AI, this is actually where AI often really thrives. There is like a limited set of possibilities, and it can actually calculate all of those and really specialize on that. Then the wicked world, ironically, why it's called that, is what we live in when there is actually like unexpected probabilities, things you can't consider.
Mm.
It's just such a long tail of factors that affect how the quote unquote game is played. And in that world, having a breadth of experience gives you an advantage. So now when you come back into AI, um, you are able to guide the AI better because you actually know so many unique domains that you can steer it to actually come out with like a successful product or answer. And I think that's where a generalist powered by specialist, and now in this day, like AI specialists, is able to thrive. So shout out for all the builders and hope people can shift to becoming more generalists.
No, and you would encourage that. So you would encourage someone who's going through university right now. They're in second year. They want to switch their major. I feel like one of the pieces of advice is just finish whatever major you're doing. You might not be doing that like subject in 5 to 10 years, anyways. You often just need a degree in
Yeah.
order to get a foot into many of the types of worlds that have those corporate jobs, but not necessarily. Like, it's interesting to think about generalists, not just in terms of generalists in the way that you've gone through your career path, but what about fixing cars on your own, or
Mhm.
fixing the plumbing, or, the things around the house? Cooking is another skill, right?
Which I'm not good
And what that you're not good at.
at. Yeah.
So, Joel, maybe you should be cooking food for your family more often, be a bit
Yeah.
more of a generalist,
It's
right?
been
Like, does
a
it
goal
truly
for
apply? If your wife was listening to this, would she be like, "Oh, Joel, you got to cook more"?
might have something to do over the next couple of weeks, it seems. Um, but I think so that I think it does apply in the sense, there's another phrase that someone told me recently, which is like a renaissance man. And I was like, what does that even mean? And it's like during the first renaissance, there are people who could like do art, they could sculpt, they were also like into technology, like Leonardo da Vinci. And
Yep.
these were like key characters during that period of renaissance that really kind of shifted society. And to an extent, I do think we are going through either an industrial revolution or another period of renaissance where those little skills that you do learn outside of even like your profession, like fixing a car or, doing plumbing in your house or electronics, those all kind of can start compounding together because you're able to tie together these different threads that other people haven't been able to, right? So I do think that applies, and if I ended up cooking, I'm sure that would be used for the better. But I do always say I think the robots are going to take cooking away from us in the next decade.
Well, they're not going to take it away from me, because over the last year, I've become a bit more of a host and chef, and I'm like really leaning into it. So next time
Nice,
you and your family come over, you'll find out I've upped my game, Joel. It's all
awesome.
about the fresh garlic, and then adding that into some mayo, and then you like add a little bit of water and you drizzle that as a sauce over top. Like, everybody thinks you're a way better chef then.
Okay, good. I'll look forward
Um,
to it.
anyways, okay. So my book that I will speak to is called The Lean Startup. It's one of the most popular books that exists in the startup world. So in 19 or not 1995, in 2015, that's when I interviewed and got hired for a job, and they were bringing me on into this startup. And I asked before I joined the CEO, because there was like 7 people working there at the time. I said, "Hey, can you give me some advice on books to read?" And this is one of the ones that she recommended, The Lean Startup. So I read through it, and it was very helpful to me, because it helped me figure out some aspects of metrics and how to use metrics in performance improvement and in just growing your company. Because it's similar to the theme that you just referenced of we live in a wicked world. In the book, I'll just read a quote from it. Innovation is a bottoms up, decentralized, and unpredictable thing, but that doesn't mean it cannot be managed. It can, but to do so requires a new management discipline, one that needs to be mastered not just by practicing entrepreneurs seeking to build the next big thing, but also by the people who support them, nurture them, and hold them accountable. And so it's offering this like other perspective, and their perspective is you need to have hypotheses that you can test. So throughout your company, you have these hypotheses. You say, we think our customers will want this. Now, one approach is you sit around and you have multiple committee meetings questioning whether or not your customers do that. Then someone on the committee says, well, we should probably send out a survey to see if the customer might like this. And that will, give us a sense of this. And then we'll review that survey, and then we'll have a focus group. And basically what they argue for, it's similar to agile project management, is like, can you just build the thing and test it with customers and get feedback as early as possible on the hypothesis? So if it's a button on your website that says something like, you can now get I was working at a company for personality surveys. An example of this would be, oh, would you like a team assessment? You could just have a button that says, would you like a team assessment, and see how many people click it, And then it's just a manual product that takes a bunch of time to do it first, that you still do it for those customers, but at least you're able to get a sense of traction. You're able to get a sense of testing out whether or not real customers like the idea. And it's been really interesting for me going into the PhD world and then the AI benchmarking space that I'm in as well, because AI benchmarking, to do it well, you need to have proper, rigorous testing methods, and you need to have scale and size. And it kind of goes against the lean startup methodology, because the lean startup would say, be lean, just test things, test these small hypotheses. Yeah, they might not be statistically significant, but you just need to get a sense of things and then just build in that direction and keep iterating and testing. And I found it really helpful to think about this as just an overall building strategy of what's your hypothesis, and then can you measure that to see if what you're building can align with that goal. So
Yeah.
it's
No,
basic and it's so fundamental, and yet I think it's neglected today because people are just like, well, just do it with AI, just build with AI. And then it's like, well, what's your hypothesis? What are you trying to figure out? And how do you work backwards from that with some metrics?
yeah, actually, that is a book that I often come back to as like a foundational book. It's really, really good. And I think what's interesting is now in the context of AI, there's going to be so much more product or slop out there that these metrics are going to matter even more. And I guess you could say fundamentals start mattering. There's another book that I'm actually partway through reading. It's a short book. It's called The $100 Million Offer: How to Make Offers So Good People Feel Stupid Saying No, by Alex Hormozi.
Wait, this
Um,
is the negotiating book that you recommended to my wife before as well?
no, that was Never Split the Difference.
Okay,
Which,
okay. So this is a
yeah.
different book. What's the
This-
what's the thesis of this book that you're
So
describing?
this one, and I actually feel like I can relate to this personally. It's like, let's say you're building a product, and it actually does a lot of what you want to do, but you finally get to market and you don't see those metrics of adoption ticking up. And you look around and you're like, well, there's this like competitor who actually has like very similar products. So like maybe I just need to like drop the price or something like that. And like you start optimizing for cost, and it's a race to the bottom, which you probably have heard that term before. What ends up happening is that you become a commodity product,
Mm,
and that threat is actually even more prevalent in this AI era because someone can just like copy what you create so quickly.
hmm,
Um, so the value of products is ultimately going to be like going down because of value and protection of software in general is like diminishing because it's so much
right.
easier to create
Mhm,
software products. So that's where, people say, well, oh, there's like this pendulum switch back to hardware because at least that has a moat. And there's all these discussions on moats now.
hmm,
But the $100 million offer actually reframes it to say, hey, it's not necessarily about the product, it's more about the value. So, what you might actually do, there's a good example of a niche market. So, if I created a book on like how to make your website, it's like there's a lot of people who have books like that. But if I say how to make websites for pastors, now instead of charging that like 20 buck book cost, I could actually charge maybe like 30 bucks. And I might actually make more money because it's like personalized towards pastors. And then if I
mhm,
said, like towards pastors working in the West in, these sort of like situations, you're like increasing the niche, and you could actually turn that into, some course, like a $99 course. Um, so what Alex in this book is like highlighting is that you increase the value by focusing more on specific niches or specific things, which actually leads to more traction. And I do think that focus on what is the value is like, again, another like KPI on how you can build something worth looking into. And yeah, and there's like a lot of books, and this is like out of that 47 or so books that I did end up reading in that year. There's a lot of books that each bring a nugget of wisdom. Another one I won't go into is The Goal by Eliyahu M. Goldratt. And this one also like connected to me where it's a fictional story where there's a parable about this guy who's supposed to optimize his factory, but he doesn't know what is the goal. Like, do I just get more people? Do I get more machines? Like, what is the goal and the point of like building things? So anyone who's also like building like physical goods, working in some of an environment like that, that's a really good book to read.
Hmm, that's interesting. I mean, it's always good when books kind of change your paradigm with something. So then you are forced to reckon with that because you realize you didn't think through it well before. Um, I think that's true of this next book that I'll talk about, which is my most explicitly Christian book in the list, which is Culture Making by Andy Crouch. And in this book, I think I valued a lot of things highly before, like critiquing or being a analyst or whatever, and serving the church in that way. And Crouch kind of talks about if you want to change the world, or maybe he doesn't use quite that language, but if you want to be impactful, if you want to shift culture in a certain direction, there's typically 5 ways that Christians do that. They all start with the letter C. One is by condemning, a posture of rejecting culture. One is by critiquing, an approach of analyzing, evaluating, pointing out flaws. A posture of copying. We talked about this in the last episode with games, video games. It's like, let's just create ones that copy the culture, stick some Bible verses on it. Um, or take pop music and add a Christian lyric to it instead, right? Another approach, consuming, engaging with culture primarily as passive. Obviously, consuming, we're like, oh, that one's bad. But the fifth, and he says most important, is creating. And he defines that as kind of producing tangible, audible, or visual new goods, institutions,
Mm.
and habits that provide better alternatives to the status quo. And I mean, Crouch is one of those guys that if you're thinking about technology and you want to go deep into it, you should just read pretty much everything he's written in the last 20 years. Culture Making came out almost 20 years ago, but I read it with a friend maybe, I don't know, 4 years ago or 5 now, and it was just really helpful, and it gave me a sense of, oh, creating is so key. It's not negotiable. It's not something that you do just in case you have that calling. We all have the calling of creating, how I started this episode, and that really is how you're going to influence your neighborhood. And it doesn't mean that you're necessarily starting a company, but it might be starting a potluck that you do once a week, or even a potluck that you do once a month in your neighborhood. That's going to be more impactful than a blog that critiques the loneliness of our age, right? We need to think about, what are we creating? What's our contribution to the people and neighbors around us? And it really brings into, it's not that we shouldn't love our neighbor with our mind through critiquing and condemnation sometimes and that sort of thing, but how can we create something to invite them into? And that's, I mean, part of the ethos of our podcast as a whole is to encourage Christians in this mindset, to help all Christians think in the way that technologists do when it comes to this, is like, well, what are we making? What are we building? And you're not a effective accelerationist just because you're building. So yeah.
No, actually, I don't think I've read Culture Making, and it sounds like a good book to read. I probably incorrectly hear Andy Crouch, and because I read one book from him, I think it's like The Life We're Looking For that
Yeah, yeah.
I
His
didn't like.
his more recent one was definitely more of a posture of um contemplation, the slowness of life, how discipleship takes time. Yeah, so that's why you got to read his whole corpus,
Yeah.
so to speak, because he's also the guy who wrote the TechWise Family, and that TechWise approach, that's been one of the most popular books as well. It's a very practical, put technology in its place. And then what's the other one that he wrote? in between those two that was also super
I see.
popular.
Playing God, is that the one?
Playing God, I'm reading through that right now. It's also a great book. So I want to read, I'm almost done reading all his major works at least. And then I want to have him on the podcast to go through all his major books
Oh,
in light of AI. And are any of the theses different now that AI is here? I don't
yeah,
know.
it'll be good.
He's
It'll
one
be
of those
good.
guys who I'm like, if I'm gonna have an interview with you, and like I could reach out to him and stuff, but I'm like, he hasn't come out with a book recently that the timing fit to invite him on the podcast. But he's definitely, we've been making a wiki that'll eventually be live of our podcast episodes in the past. And we always quote this guy and recommend his stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, it'll be good to have him on because I think that, like you were saying, there are some books that I didn't resonate with as well. So it's always good to have like a balanced and complex view of things and challenge. To your point
The
earlier,
life we're looking for
challenge
is good
yourself.
though. It's just not, it's not your day-to-day work. Like the culture making would be more inspiring to your day-to-day work.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
in
yeah,
terms of how your posture towards your family, your posture toward discipling your kids, towards your neighbor, like that's more like tending a garden that the life we're looking for offers a vision for that. That's
yeah,
not like a build quick sort of posture
yeah.
and
Totally,
have
totally.
some metrics. Like you don't want to add a whole bunch of metrics to your potluck, right? Um so
Yeah,
anyways,
no, it's a good point. It's a good point. There's a time to be happy and a time to be sad, sort of thing. You know.
yes, yes. A
Um.
time to measure and a time to not
t-
measure a single thing and to just
yes.
enjoy the gifts that God has given in the meal
Yeah.
that you eat together.
Okay, so I'll take the book recommendation in a slightly different direction. Um, I've also been trying to understand where AI is going, and this is kind of on the frontier labs research. I mean, I don't need to go back into mythos models and all that type of stuff, and what's recently happened with like the U.S. government and blocking them. But even actually, I just saw GPT 5.6 is ready and they actually are taking a different approach with the government and they're slow rolling it out to select customers because this is quote
Thanks
unquote
to the
emergency.
request of the government, which
Yes.
perhaps is a little haphazard, or perhaps it's unnecessarily haphazard. I don't know. I don't know,
Okay,
man.
okay,
It's
you know what, we should
complicated.
probably just like talk about it since this is a podcast to talk about it. So did you hear about why and how like mythos originally got pulled, like the jailbreak, and who
Yeah, yeah.
actually was rumored?
Amazon. I mean, Trump even admitted it was Amazon's
Did he? Okay.
team that
Yeah,
figured it
yeah. I
out.
saw an article. I'm not sure it was a Wall Street Journal or something like that, where it's like Andy Jassy is rumored to basically be like, "Hey, we jailbroke this to take the guardrails off of Fable, and now it's like super dangerous." And he
But
brought
what
that
did
to
they
an
actually take
administration.
off in terms of the guardrails? I think that's what was debated, whether the guardrails were really like there was a request that was refused, and then all of a sudden they added some different context. And then all of a sudden that same request wasn't refused and they believed that that was jailbreaking, but
Yeah,
maybe it was a false positive or like a false negative, so to speak. Like it falsely refused the request originally. So then the context update doesn't fundamentally change a safety protocol. So, anyways, and Trump, I should clarify, Trump didn't confirm that it was Amazon. He just confirmed that it was one of Anthropic's investors.
yeah.
So,
And they
in
are
an
one of the
interview, he
biggest.
let that slip.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And Amazon is one of their biggest investors. So it's interesting where it's like, here's someone who wants to support the company, obviously, because they have skin in the game, but they're still coming forward with like a whistleblowing moment. So I wouldn't be confident that they like made that decision lightly, right? Because they knew the risks of like, hey, I'm going to bring this forward. And if it doesn't get addressed, this turns into something that could affect my
Right.
investment. Um, so whatever the actual jailbreak was, whatever the ramifications, you would think that Anthropic, who often espouses that they are like safety first and that we should restrict other people from having access to these models, would be like, oh, let's take this seriously. But then it seemed so out of character that they were like, yeah, actually, we're not going to do that. Don't worry, it's not a big
Correct.
deal. And then they got the pushback from the administration who was like, you are supposed to be the safety company. Okay, let's do this export control ban. And then instead of managing export controls, they just like said, okay, we're just like stopping it for everyone, right?
And
Um,
one of their founders is Canadian. So by those export controls, they can't
yes.
access their own. So
Yeah.
that twist in the story I really enjoyed. Um, that he's working, founded an American company, all about these American values. Dario always talks about that. He's one of the founders, and yet he's still Canadian, doesn't have US citizenship yet. Um, so that was just a funny twist to the
Yeah, yeah. It's
story.
like, oh, hey, all these developers, you can't work on this project anymore. You're banned. So
Yeah. Okay,
it's
but
like,
why did you bring this up?
okay.
Like, what are you going back to in
So
terms of?
there's two books here that I've been looking at. One I mentioned in the past, How to Create a Mind by Ray Kurzweil. He's like a
Mm,
futurist. He talks about like he was predicting the singularity. Actually, I should double check what the date is. I think it was like 2045. But now you say that 2045, you're like, oh, it's gonna happen sooner than that. It's gotta be like 2030 something. Um, with how fast we've been moving, which is it's crazy. So that's a good
yeah,
book. And another one,
2045 is
yeah.
when the singularity will occur, according to him.
And
And
for
then he wrote
listening,
"The Singularity Is Near." I haven't read that whole book yet, but he's a transhumanist, guys. He's not a Christian. He's not someone who is super
yeah,
helpful. He kind of
yes,
has a perspective on the mind and the body that, well, the mind is just like software and the body is just like hardware, and this is just
yes,
how it
yes.
works and all that kind of stuff. It's yeah. Anyways,
We'll caveat it that these both of these two books I'm talking about aren't Christian books, and I think as a Christian, I often will like I've read portions of the Quran in the past, and I would say not everyone should do that. But I think like if you are a strong Christian, you're able to like understand what others are reading and then like empathize with the way their mind is going and kind of understand the perspective
no,
in
Joel, you
order
should
to better
never
be.
read any books written by people who aren't Christian. I say sarcastically, of course we need to be willing to read other books
So
and follow things to truth. So, anyways.
yeah, so Ray Kurzweil, futurist, and this other one is called A Brief History of Intelligence by Max Bennett, which is
Mm,
actually like very evolutionary focused. But
mm,
the reason I mentioned this is it turns out a bunch of these AI researchers at Anthropic, OpenAI, these frontier labs are like looking to these books for inspiration in where the next breakthrough is going to come from. How do I like create the next foundational model that is going to shatter the benchmarks? And, we don't need to, again, belabor all the history, but there was this period of just like add more compute, just like more and more compute, and these models will get more and more powerful. But we've kind of plateaued in those capabilities, so we are actually looking for a scientific breakthrough, so to speak.
mhm,
So I'll give you one example in the brief history of intelligence. It talks about how there were 5 evolutionary stages, right? And that in the very early stage, we developed something called the steering function. And today, AI models don't have that. They're actually like more on the last stage of intelligence, which is like prefrontal cortex, bringing relations together, but they don't have a steering function. And I'll kind of like explain what that means. So if I say the word spider, and I think I mentioned this in the past, you already have a reaction to it. Some people have a very repulsive reaction like fear, and
mhm.
they will argue that like, hey, this is evolutionary, that to protect yourself from dangers, not only like seeing a spider but thinking of a spider, they all invoke this sort of lower level stimulus
It's
like
like
in
an
your amygdala.
affective response, or, we've talked about it before. It's like uh, brain one, brain two, or however that
Yeah,
one
yeah,
guy
thinking
talks about
fast
it.
and thinking slow, which is like
Yeah, so there's an
another good book.
initial, and there have been theologians who have tried to speak about that, including Herman Bavinck talked about this kind of initial gut instinct response is actually related to our affections for God,
Hmm.
and how that gets misplaced, or that there's a reality deep within us that isn't the logical reality, that's just our yearning for something more, or yearning for the flight and fright has a deeper embeddedness in the reality of God. Anyways, you keep going.
Yeah, no, so that sort of thinking of like, how do we embed a steering function into the AI models so that they also have biases to do certain things
Mm.
is an area of research that these researchers are doing. Because when you're creating this like LLM, you can put some guardrails around it, but guardrails are different because they are after the fact. You've already come out with like a
Mhm.
computer response, and then you go through this like filtering versus like having it at the foundational layer as like the seed that directs the thought is going to be different. So it's very interesting. These books, if you are interested in psychology and how these inputs are going into the researchers and the experiments that they're doing and trying to create the next LLMs, these are both really good books. Ray Kurzweil looks at it more from structural neuroscience, so more computer science, again, like the
Mhm.
neurons and how they connect to each other. And then Max Bennett is more like evolutionary biology. And maybe one more caveat I'll add is it's interesting to think about how these models will evolve, to use that word, um, because of the theories that the researchers are taking in. And part of me sometimes wonders, like, well, wouldn't it be great if they had like a biblical foundation when they were creating these models? And I actually don't know how many Christians are at these frontier models companies. But yeah, it's an area of just wondering, like, how will this go? I don't know.
Do you
You said
not believe in evolution, Joel, to put you on the spot?
I believe in microevolution, but not macroevolution, which is like there are, and they don't compound to eventually like they're break these leaps. So micro is like, yeah, over time, you could have a more hairy person or different color skin or stuff like that, um, based on genetics, but not that you're going to change species. Um,
Hmm. So I would so I'll just add a quick, caveat to what I'm about to say, that I am now an elder, at least at the time of this being released. I'll be an elder at my church now. So I was voted in by my members, by the members of the church. I was there voting as well for myself. So I'm an elder at our church, and so now I always need to kind of have that on the back of my mind, that when I speak publicly, um, I'm a public figure now at church, and I want to be cognizant of the fact that I think our church has a whole bunch of different opinions on this.
mhm.
Um, Now, we don't have in our statement of faith an allegiance to young earth creationism. And I think Christians historically, if you go back over the last 2,000 years, it has not been young earth creationism as a majority view. That's a relatively novel way of understanding
Which
history.
for listeners, young Earth creationism is like the Earth is only 7,000 years old, right? Something like
Correct.
that,
Correct.
or 11, or whatever it is.
Yeah. So maybe still believe in microevolution, but not macroevolution. Gavin Ortland has a number of good videos on this, so I'll direct listeners to him. I find his videos on this topic, evolution, Gavin Ortland, YouTube, very persuasive. Um, but I don't hold them really with a closed fist. I'm pretty open to being convinced otherwise on this, and I really believe in a historical Adam, a historical Eve. They really existed. Everything in Genesis 1 through 11 that wasn't like prehistory, that's just myth, or more fictional or poetic storytelling. No, there's reality there, there's history there. It still contains some poetic structures, like the word day is used 3 different times in the first 2 chapters of Genesis. Even if your kid asks you, what is a day, how many hours in a day, And tell my kid 24 hours, and he's like, well, then how many hours are at night? And then I go, well, that's a different question. Like there's day and night, and then there's day, and then there's the day in which God created everything, which is how Genesis 2:4 talks about it. So there's use of language that is unique and needs to be understood in context. But I have no issue with that. And just to your point of like this, using the created world as a blueprint, including humans as a blueprint for creating great machines, is something that Christians should celebrate rather than feel awkward about,
Yeah.
because we should take the best designs to build new designs. And who are we to neglect the image of God and the amazing creativity of God, who is man that God is mindful of him? Yes, but also we're crowned with honor and glory because we are the pinnacle or the jewel of creation. And so I think it's good for engineers to look at the human brain and to say, oh, this is how neurons work. We should build software to replicate that and chips to
Yeah.
replicate that. So I think that can be a way to honor God as long as you put technology in its place rather than refuse him. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think, and to that point on creationists versus evolutionists and how that implicates your development of AI models, I wonder how it would be if they created an innate belief in God, right? Like we say, hey, like all
Mm,
humans are looking for the creator, right? We have that belief. Now, what if you imbued AI models with that understanding rather than an evolutionary one, right? Um, how would that change how the model interacts with the world?
yeah.
And doing it at the surface layer with boundaries is going to be different than doing it at like the training foundational layer, of course.
Well, and that is so there's a bunch of benchmarks that exist on morality, but they often struggle to function as a good benchmark. So for example, there's AI benchmarks on math, and then they're able to say this model is better than that model because it's better at these math equations. And everyone agrees, okay, it's better. But from a moral perspective, well, which morality are you using in order to say this model is better than that model? And I really think it's an opportunity for Christians. There's a moral argument for God, and there's just like, we need to have morals. And so what's your foundation for those morals? These AI companies are looking for it. And I do think AI models are better when they're built with God in mind.
Mhm.
So anyways, we're getting distracted from the book recommendation. So we gotta
So
go
those
to
are the
that.
two books. And then you had a couple more?
I just have one more because I did the one recommendation at the very beginning. So this is my last one. One of the ones that I read maybe 16, 17 years ago, one of those ones that
Wow.
shaped me in my direction. And it's a pretty popular one. I wonder if you've ever read it. It's called the 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership.
No, I've not read that specific one. I've heard like, 48 laws of power or some other 30 laws of something. Is it the same vein or it's actually different?
So it's written by John C. Maxwell. And it's one of those books like New York Times bestseller, revised and updated. Like it has a bunch of different editions because it's just been so popular. It's like often the leadership book. I think he's a Christian and he has some subtle hints that he's a Christian through the book, but he doesn't necessarily write it from that perspective. And when he's
Okay, yeah.
saying the laws of leadership, it's truths that are recognized in they're like norms. They're things that are always true, with few exceptions when it comes to how people lead and follow others. And like one of them, the law of addition: leaders add value by serving others. If you have a leader of your organization who stops and picks up garbage in the hallway, that will imbibe a different sense of his leadership and the way that people follow him because of that characteristic of the law of addition.
Mhm.
Um, there's like the law of respect, which is similar to that, which is people naturally follow better leaders than themselves. This just happens over the course of a meeting where you get a sense. Everyone does this in the room, and we just need to recognize that these laws of leadership exist, that some people are better leaders than others. And in the course of an hour in a committee meeting or in a in a group where people are building stuff, all of a sudden you just start to say, wow, I'm going to respect this person more because they seem to be thoughtful, care, compassion. The things that are part of leadership just end up being the things that you want to follow. Um, there's other ones too, like of course there's 21 of these laws, and it's not like there was a single one that spoke to me in particular. I remember reading his one law, revisiting it when I was the president of student union, and on timing and just the importance of timing, and being like, oh, this is so helpful to remind myself that you might have the best idea and the best policy proposal, but you need the right timing. And that, yeah. So anyways, it's one of those books that when it comes to building something, you will build things much better collaboratively. You'll have a much higher yield if you take advantage of the different skills and giftings of different individuals. And you will only be able to do that well if you grow in leadership. And leadership is something you can learn. It is something that can be caught and taught. And so it'd be a book that I would recommend. I was looking for my physical copy of it, but I gave it to somebody recently, so I don't even know where it is. So hopefully I get it back at some point.
Yeah, no, actually, I've never read that one, and definitely one I'll add to my list. Definitely, leadership books are good. There's two that I'm just gonna throw out there: "Leaders Eat Last," which is Simon Sinek, and then
Mm.
"Extreme Ownership" by Jocko. I think Jocko is it Williams, but he's also like Navy SEALs. That one is a little quote unquote extreme, and I'm not gonna say I endorse all their views, but leadership is such an important area to gain wisdom on because, as you mentioning, it has like so many downstream implications.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and it just there's a lot of life principles there. I think of leadership books as I think of the book of Proverbs. Of course, one is inspired, one's not. But the book of Proverbs asks you to look at the land and to look at the natural laws of the world and to draw insight from them and then to live in the way that reality and the grain of the wood travels. So yeah, it's really helpful to just take time to reflect on not just theology, but on all these other areas as well. And we can we can learn from God and about God, even not just from the book of scripture, but the book of nature. And it is good for us to grow in these areas. So this has been fun. If you have made it to this point, you can click a link in the description and you can get all these books for free. No, I'm just kidding. Imagine if we did that. No, we're not made of money, so you can support us so that we will be made of money. No. Joel said it well on a recent episode that when people join our Patreon and they just, for $1 a month, it's just, oh man, there are people that are part of this like
Community.
movement. They're part of
Yeah.
this desire to have more Christians thinking well about building well. And that's what we exist to help cultivate in this whole space of faith and technology. And we're glad that you're with us. Joel, last words for the summer. What's final piece of advice to all the dads and moms out there? We do have moms who listen. They're about 5% of our listeners, I would guess.
Your final words
Our
for the summer.
YouTube stats, man, we got a lot of masculinity in our
Oh my god,
views.
maybe we got to add a woman to the pod. Let's see.
Yeah, they
Um,
are neglected sometimes.
Final words for summer. I mean, I'm taking a month off for pat leave, so I'll be spending a lot of time with my family, and actually, even people in my workplace, even if they're not taking pat leave, they're taking time off in the summer. So it's almost this expectation that like, hey, you're gonna if you have kids, they're gonna be home for the summer. Take some time, invest in the family, like you mentioned in the earlier in the pod. We're gonna be taking some time, and if we can't meet on the podcast, we'll take a couple weeks hiatus. So definitely keep that as a priority. But then, secondarily, I'm gonna squeeze some time in to build because oh my gosh, this is the most exciting time that I've ever had to build. Read, be inspired, and create.
Yeah, man, I'm with you. I have the bug too. I've maxed out my Claude tokens after just like 4 days because I'm building too much.
There
All
you
right,
go. Now you have to do.
use tech, find rest, glorify God. Take care, everybody.